Hi, friends, and welcome back to the Very Good Gardening Podcast. If you're new here, my name is Kristen McCoy, and this is where we talk all about growing your own food. No perfect gardens here, just very good ones. Because if you're gardening in a climate like mine in Maryland, Zone 7B, this is the season where everything starts to feel exciting again. And a little overwhelming. Seed starting is one of those things that looks simple until you try it. Suddenly you've got tons of questions like, what lights do I need? What kind of soil should I use? Why are my seedlings so leggy? And how did I already forget what I planted? And where did I plant it? So today I'm going to walk you through exactly how I approach indoor seed starting, what I've already started, what's coming up next, and the materials I use, and how I adjust things depending on the plant. I also talk about what I do now versus what I did before I had a greenhouse, because I know a lot of people assume that you need a greenhouse, but you absolutely do not. And before we get into it, I want to shout out two things that help support this podcast. First, Bonus View. That's where all of my garden-to-table recipes live. If you're growing food and trying to figure out how to actually use it before it goes to waste, that's where you'll find detailed recipes and a space to ask questions. And Fourth Wall is where all of my Very Good Gardening merch lives. If you like comfortable shirts that tell the world that you're a gardener, that's where you'll find them. All right, let's talk indoor seed starting. When people talk about seed starting, one of the biggest questions that I get is the timing. Seed starting really isn't about exact dates, but rather a window. On the back of all seed packets, you'll see a window of exactly when to plant. If your seed packet says to plant on April 1st, you need to find different seeds. Everything is tied to your last frost date, and your last frost date is going to be an average. My last frost date in Maryland, 7B, is going to be the end of April or early May. That's when a lot of my warm weather seedlings are going to go into the ground. But when starting seeds indoors, it's going to give you some kind of window like start 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date. So make sure you know what your zone is and your frost dates because that information is going to be crucial. Also keep in mind that each crop has a different start date. Like tomatoes, for instance, they really need to be started about 6 weeks before the average last frost. But peppers are going to be 8 to 10 weeks before the average last frost. So I like to start my peppers mid to late February, and then I'll start my tomatoes early to mid-March. And remember that not everything needs to be started indoors. In fact, some things don't do so well starting indoors. Looking on the back of your seed packet, if it says directly sow into the ground, believe it. A lot of people like to start every single thing indoors and then get very, very overwhelmed. Especially things like watermelon and cucumbers that grow extremely fast, and if it is March and not ready to be planted in the ground, you're going to be in trouble. And something to consider that if your seed packet says start 6 weeks before the average last frost, 6 weeks is enough. If you start earlier than that, it is possible that your plants or seedlings are getting so big that they become uncontrollable. And then if you still have 3 or 4 weeks before you can plant them outside, it becomes too much. I am speaking from experience here. I once had a tomato seedling that was 3.5 feet tall inside, and it was flopping all over the place. I had nothing to hold it up. I couldn't put a cage indoors. It was a problem. So whatever the seed packets tell you, believe them. Right now, it is the end of January, and I've already started some crops. That's because these crops are cool weather crops, and they need a lot more time indoors before I can plant them out in March, possibly the beginning of April. Onions I sowed in the middle of January, and they're already starting to pop up. Included in the onions are also shallots. Technically, they're different, but I started them at the same time. This is my second year starting onions indoors as seeds, and I am so excited because last year was a huge success. I will never buy onion sets again, but I know other people do, and that's perfectly fine. But starting onions inside in January kind of gave me a renewed hope that gardening is right around the corner. I was so excited. Sowing all of those seeds is the first thing that I do in January, and it made me really happy. Now, I do have a greenhouse, so those are in the greenhouse right now under the lights. But if I didn't have the greenhouse, then I'd still be putting them under lights on my kitchen table. It really doesn't make a difference. The onions are going to grow either way. Onions are one of those things that when they first come up, they look extremely unimpressive. They honestly just look like grass. But later, they'll turn into little tiny bulbs and they're super cute. And then I give them a haircut, which just means that I trim them to about 3 inches tall, and I can use all those trimmings as chives. So it's kind of like pre-onions. I'll do that when I see that they're about 5 to 6 inches tall. Onions are actually one of those things that are really tough. They don't mind the cooler weather, and I don't really bother with them very much. Once I sow them, I kind of forget about them. I put them under the lights, and then a few weeks later, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's right. Look at all those little baby onions. I highly recommend trying to grow onions from seed because it's one of the easier crops that I grow from seed. And the reward I have found is totally worth it. I've also started all of my brassicas. So that includes Brussels sprouts, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower. I will not start my kohlrabi because that has a shorter season. I'll probably start my kohlrabi in about a month because it only needs 4 weeks indoors to get started. Brassicas are all cool weather crops, so the earlier that I can start and they can get established as seedlings, the better. I will plant my brassicas in the soil at the end of March. And I should be able to harvest from them around the end of April or early May. It really just depends on the weather. I don't want super freezing temperatures, but I also don't want it to get too warm. I had a ton of success with all of my brassicas last year, so I'm really hoping to repeat that. Next month in February, I'm going to be starting all of my peppers, some herbs, and some flowers. Peppers are always started in February because they're a lot slower to grow than almost any of my other crops. And peppers need quite a long season, so I start in February and sometimes I'm not harvesting from them until July, maybe even August. Especially my super hot peppers, sometimes I'm not harvesting from them until September. I'm totally okay with that. I'm willing to wait because some of those peppers are my favorite from my garden. I'm definitely speaking about those lemon drops. Ugh, they're just the best. Since peppers like this super hot weather, they are going to go on a heat mat. I'm going to put the entire biodome on top of the heat mat and I'm going to keep it there for the entire time as seedlings. Now, that is what I used to do. Now that I have a greenhouse, I do have to adjust that a little bit because the greenhouse can get quite warm, especially when we get closer to April or May. But I do want those peppers to be consistently warm the entire time that they are growing in my greenhouse. The heat mat really helps with that. I know that my pepper seedlings would not grow without that heat mat. They're really inexpensive, but they make a massive difference. With peppers, you have to be patient. Sometimes you will not see germination from peppers for 3, maybe even 4 weeks. Do not give up on them. Sometimes I go live on social media and I will get questions over and over again about pepper germination. It goes something like, I haven't seen any germination in the last week and a half. I'm really worried. Should I keep planting again? I don't know if I have any more seeds. And every time my answer is, be patient, especially with those super hot peppers. I'm talking Ghost, Reapers. Those are going to take the longest to germinate. And then they're going to be very slow growing, but they are worth the wait. I'll also start some of my perennial herbs in February. Lavender, rosemary, thyme, those are all going to take a long time. Sometimes I even start mint in February because it takes forever to germinate. I start these early to give them a head start as I do all of my other plants, and I have to say that direct sowing these, I really have never had any success with it. So my advice to you is that if you find that you're in April and May and you really want some of these longer to germinate herbs, I suggest that you get those as starts from your local nursery. There is no shame in that. I have done that multiple times. I did it last year. No one is going to think less of you as a gardener, I promise. And then I start snapdragons as well. Snapdragons actually like the cool weather, and it takes a little bit of time to germinate and get started as seedlings. So I'm starting them and dahlias during that time if I'm doing dahlias from seed. Just like everything else, they need a little extra time. Then we move into March, and of course the big one for March is tomatoes. Do not start your tomatoes too early. I already told you my horror story of my 3.5-foot seedling. Don't do that to yourself. I know you're excited, but trust me on this. Please only start your seedlings about 6 weeks before you want to plant them in the ground. Save yourself the trouble. Tomatoes will take about a week to germinate, and then they grow pretty quickly. If you start too early, you will create tall, lanky plants that have nowhere to go. Tomatoes are actually a vine, and they want to grow long and fast. If tomatoes are left to grow on their own unassisted, they're going to grow along the soil horizontally. And so at first they'll grow up, and then they'll start to bend and grow this way. Sometimes if I have a tomato plant that is extra long, I'll actually put it on its side as I plant it. It works really well. However, you don't want 50 tomato plants that are 2.5, 3 feet tall on your kitchen table or wherever you're starting your seeds. Start them at the right time, give them what they need, they will grow healthy. You want tomato seedlings to be about a foot or 1.5 feet tall when they go in the ground. That's the ideal. This is when I'm starting all of the rest of my herbs, except for cilantro. I should have included cilantro in February because it is a cool weather crop and it bolts quickly. So add cilantro to your February starts. Again, if you are in Maryland, 7B, or in a similar climate. Basil is a very fast-growing plant, and I don't actually mind that it gets a little bit big before I can put it outside. Because I can actually harvest from basil before I put it outside just to keep it under wraps, and I'll use that basil in my cooking. Win-win. And March is when I'm starting all of my other flowers, except for zinnias. Zinnias grow so fast, those are going to be in my April starts. Speaking of April starts, that's pretty much the only thing that I'm starting in April. Sometimes I'll find seeds that only need a 3 to 4 week head start, and that's when I'll start them in April. But honestly, the only thing that I have on my list right at this moment to start in April are zinnias. But April is when I'm doing a lot of other seed starting chores, like thinning. At the end of March and all throughout April, I am doing 2 crucial steps to seed starting. Number 1, I am thinning out any plants to make sure that there's only 1 plant per planting hole. This is crucial. I know that it's really hard to sacrifice plants for one, but it's totally necessary, especially for tomatoes. 2 or more plants in a planting hole for tomatoes, none of them are going to survive or thrive. It's better to make the sacrifice and cut 2 of those seedlings right at the base. Some people like to separate them out, but I have found that my seedlings don't survive. They become really weak because the roots are being messed with. So instead, I take my little snippers and I cut off the sacrificial plants so that one can grow. I like to pick the one that I think is the strongest. That's not always the tallest because sometimes they can get a little leggy. But the strongest plant is the one that's going to survive, and then I take all those little tiny baby seedlings and I put them in the compost. The only thing that I don't really thin out to 1 plant per planting hole are some herbs. Basil doesn't really mind growing up together, but almost all of the perennial herbs, they want to be just 1 plant. Parsley doesn't mind, cilantro doesn't mind, they can all be crowded together into 1 planting hole, but all flowers, all vegetables, and most perennial herbs like 1 plant, 1 hole. The second thing that I'm doing at the end of March and almost all of April is potting things up. When the plant gets too big for the pot, it needs to go in a bigger pot. You can stunt the growth, it's really tedious, but it is for the best of the plant. Once the plants are about 1 inch or 2 tall and they have their true sets of leaves, that's when they're going to go into a 3 or 4 inch pot. Tomatoes rather quickly will grow out of that pot, and then I will put them in an even bigger one. My herbs can usually stay in that 4-inch pot along with my flowers. Sometimes though I do have to pot up my peppers as well. Potting up is tedious but extremely necessary, and I like to make sure that I add a fertilizer at that time. Before getting into the fertilizers specifically, let's talk about all of the materials that I use. First is going to be the seed starting mix. I like to use things that have no nutrients. I know that goes against what you thought, but coconut coir or peat moss, those are going to be the best to start seeds in. A lot of times I like to mix that with a little bit of perlite or vermiculite to create a little bit more drainage in the soil, but you do not want to add compost at this time. Seeds like to germinate in a sterile environment. I also like to use these like sponge plugs that go into a system that I have. They're from Parkseed. No, I'm not sponsored, but they have been a phenomenal system. I do have to buy those every year. It's not cost efficient at all, but it works. For my brassicas and my onions, I'm using just regular cell trays with that combination of my seed starting mix in it. I like to save those sponge plugs and the whole bio system that I have from Parkseed. I like to use that for my tomatoes and my peppers and my flowers. I find they do best in that kind of environment. The Parkseed system that I have has a styrofoam mold where all of those sponge plugs go into it. I can fit 80 plants into one biodome system. I have 4 of them. And then I have all those other kinds of systems where it's the plastic cells that go into the plastic tray that has the little biodome that goes over top. Those are actually really cheap and you can reuse them every year. I am going on year 3 with my systems. They work great. I highly recommend them, especially if you're trying to seed start on a budget. I just happen to have these biodomes. This is going on season 7 of using them. So I've had them for so long that I don't even remember what they cost me. They have definitely been worth whatever I paid. But I've used them for the last 7 years, so I've gotten my money's worth. I tried soil blocking. I tried it. It's not for me. I know that some people swear by them. It's not for me. I tried it. It's too messy. It was too much for me. So I am sticking with what I know works. I will say that just because something does or does not work for me doesn't mean that that will be the same results for you. Use whatever system works. Use whatever you feel comfortable with or whatever financial constraints you have. Most systems work perfectly fine as long as they have 2 key things. Number 1, they have to have a tray that collects the water on the bottom so that you can put the water there and it can be absorbed through the bottom of the soil. That's number 1. Number 2, make sure that it has some kind of top to trap the humidity. If it has those 2 things, chances are it's going to work perfectly fine. And as I said before, heat mats are really, really crucial. I'm not going to put heat mats under my onions or my brassicas because those are cool weather crops, but I'm going to put them under my peppers, and sometimes if I have enough heat mats, I'll put them under my tomatoes as well. It just helps speed up the germination and growing process, especially in the beginning. And then, of course, the grow lights. Over the years, I have had many, many, many different kinds of grow lights. Some are much better than others. Before I had a greenhouse, I didn't have anything that I could hang the lights from. So I got lights that would clamp onto the side of the table, and then you could bend them over and put them right above your seedlings. They worked great. They have timers on them, so I could put them on for 12 hours out of the day. They were perfect. They do get a little bulky, but the lights themselves work really well. Now that I have a greenhouse, I was able to install lights that come down and hang right above. These are superior. I have had more success with these kinds of lights. And I think it's because I haven't had to worry about the positioning of the lights themselves, because sometimes I would bend it here, and then I would bend another one, and then this one would get wonky. I've had more success, so I will say that the hanging lights have been better. However, I only had those hanging lights last year. I've been doing this for a while, and I did it inside without those hanging lights and without a greenhouse. So please do not trick yourself into thinking that you need a certain type of grow light in order to grow. That's just not the case. When you are looking for lights, Make sure that you've got something that can adjust the height as the plants grow. You want your lights about an inch, maybe two, above your seedlings. If you don't have your lights close enough to the seedlings, they will be reaching up for that light and they will get what we call leggy. Leggy plants are usually not healthy, strong plants. Sometimes you can fix them. That's totally possible. But you really want to avoid the legginess in the beginning. This is really important. Some plants, they need light in order to germinate, and other plants do not need or want light in order to germinate. But every single plant, once it's germinated, needs lighting in order to grow. You want lights on them as soon as they have germinated. So be on the lookout. There are some types of lights that are stronger than others. So if you find that the light is a little too harsh on your plants, adjust it and move that light farther. I have actually not experienced lighting that was so weak, even though I had it an inch from the plant was still reaching for it. I know others have, and so I'm not saying that that's not a problem, but just be on the lookout and adjust as necessary. The last thing that a lot of people forget about is a fan. I have a little fan that again hooks to the end of the table and it oscillates back and forth. The fan is going to emulate real life wind and it's going to allow your plants to adjust better to the outdoors. This is crucial. Your plants will thank you. You will thank you. Get a fan. Now let's move on to watering your seedlings. First and foremost, please do not water your seedlings from the top. Put the water in the bottom of the tray and allow the soil and the roots to soak up that water. It will prevent mold and other issues. Next, do not overwater your plants. Overwatering is way more harmful than underwatering. Most plants can come back from underwatering. Most plants cannot come back from overwatering. Only add water if the soil of your seedlings is completely dry or they are showing you signs that they need to be watered. Do not use a calendar, do not use a system. Check the soil, decide if it needs to be watered. Now let's talk fertilizer. That seed starting mix, as I said, has no nutrients in it. So you're going to want to add growth stimulants like organic Rev and my personal secret, which is not such a secret anymore, club soda. When you're fertilizing your seedlings, you want to think about the 3 macronutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen is going to be the big one because you want a lot of leafy growth. But phosphorus is actually found in club soda. So when you're ready to water your plants and they need a little boost of a nutrient, give them the club soda instead of your regular watering and watch the difference that it makes. It is one of the cooler things that I do. Also, I get a lot of weird looks when I go to the grocery store because they only sell the club soda that I like in a 1-liter bottle. So I'm in the grocery store buying 25 1-liter bottles of club soda. And I get the weirdest looks. Totally worth it. I do it every time. Keep in mind that your seedlings are small and vulnerable. They cannot handle those big punch fertilizers, so be gentle. Let's talk labels. I just get little plastic labels that I put into each cell of my plants. It's tedious. I write out hundreds of varieties every single year, but it's totally worth it. That label in that cell is going to follow the plant all the way up until harvest. By the end of the season, I know what everything is, but when they are little tiny baby seedlings, I can't tell whether or not that is a super sauce tomato or a Cherokee purple. There's no distinguishing between those 2 types of tomatoes when they're this big. Put the labels in, take the time to label them. You will be very upset with yourself if you don't do it now. The last step that you need to remember before you put them outdoors is to harden them off. Indoor plants are very spoiled. They've had this nice, cozy, temperature-controlled environment with a little tiny bit of wind every once in a while, and then you're going to put them out into the harsh sun, the rain, storms, winds, and they're not going to be happy. The sun especially is going to completely kill your seedlings. Those little tiny seedlings that you have been babying for months. They will shrivel right up in the sun if you don't give them some exposure a little at a time. I take about 2 weeks to harden off my seedlings, and it can be a lot, especially the first couple of days, because by the time I have put all of the trays out into the sun, it's about time to take them all back in. I like to start off with 30 minutes a day in the sun, and then I will up it to an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, and then I will increase the time outside by about an hour for the next week and a half. Yes, it's a lot of work, but it's totally worth it. Your plants will not be happy if they go from that cozy environment to the super, super harsh climate outside. Do your plants and yourself a favor and take the time to introduce them slowly. So that's my approach to indoor seed starting. It's not perfect, it's not rigid, but it is intentional. If there's one thing that I want you to take away from this episode, it's that seed starting does not need to be complicated. You don't need every tool, you don't need a greenhouse. You just need to understand what each plant needs in order to give it a reasonable head start. And remember, you don't need to start every single seed. Buying starts is always an option. Starting your seeds a little bit later is always an option. I know that it feels counterintuitive, but starting your seeds later is actually better than starting them too early, as we've discussed. If you want to see how I turn everything I grow into real meals, make sure you check out my bonus view. Again, that's where all of my full harvest to table recipes live. That's also the place to ask any questions about a recipe or if you aren't sure what to do with your garden harvest. And if you want to support the Very Good Gardening podcast in a wearable way, my fourth wall shop is linked in the show notes. That's where you'll find shirts and designs for people who grow their own food and like to keep it simple. Thank you so much for listening, for sharing the podcast, and for being here. Until next time, grow something and start something very good.